Welcome back. In the last lecture, I talked about the two Congresses phenomenon, how Americans hate Congress as an institution. It's the least trusted national institution, even though it's the most democratic. And yet, despite the fact that we have this great disdain for the institution, we love our particular congressperson. We reelect them at what would call obscene rates. House members reelected 92, 93% of the time. Senators who are less likely to get elected still get elected 77 to 80% of the time. And I talked about one of the major differences between Congress and the president is that congresspersons have no term limits on them. And I talked about how John Dingell served 60 years in the House of Representatives from 1955 to 2015. I talked about this controversial idea. Your book certainly seems to emphasize it in the chapter of this permanent campaign, the fact that members of Congress are always running for re-election rather than governing. Personally, I am not as bothered by this as the book is. As I mentioned in the last lecture, congresspersons have to get re-elected if they're going to get anything done. I introduced the debate between, remember, Morris v. Arena and Richard Fenno, and I will tell you that I'm a little bit closer to Fenno's notion of Congress than to Fiorina's. I think certainly re-election may be goal number one, but I do believe there are second, third, and fourth goals, and that is public policy making. Besides having advantages such as money when they run for re-election and support from interest groups, which your book talks about, I believe the primary reason for the two Congresses phenomenon is constituency service. We see our congresspersons communicating with us with casework, doing personal favors for us, for example, whether it's getting us a check from the government, whether it's getting a loved one into a VA hospital. Casework is the most personal, and frankly, I think it is the most effective form of constituency service. Second is franking. When I ask you about franking on the exam, these are the free mailings that go out to constituents. In the computer age, these have become much more specialized. Congresspersons have a pretty good idea of what our interests are. These are supposed to be political informative guides for voters. In my mind, they're really thinly veiled re-election pieces. And even if the voter is not really interested in the material, even if the voter were to throw it away, the goal of franking is to at least reinforce the name recognition of the incumbent. The third one, pork barrel projects or earmarks, are my personal favorite. They used to be used very specifically in the old days. I talked about how my former congressman got pork barrel money to get us a new sewage treatment plant back in Fairdale. How there is now a freeway bypass connecting my former town to Louisville that's named after him. That was part of a pork barrel project. I still think these exist on a broader scale. Your book discusses the $305 billion highway mass transit bill that put a lot of money into a lot of congressional districts. Your book, I think, unfortunately is correct. Even though these earmarks were banned in 2011, it looks like they are coming back. There are members, and here's one where, not surprisingly, there are congresspersons of both parties who are trying to get money pumped into their home district, and my guess is these will be back shortly. I would not be surprised if in the next couple of years. So when congresspersons do their job and they go out and vote, what are some things that are likely to get them to vote one way or the other? Your book mentions two. I'm going to add a third, both to my notes and to your reading. But I want to start with the first one. that's in your notes. It's something that I introduced right at the very start of the course, um, and I want to expand it a little bit. So a constituency vote is exactly what its name implies. The vote is being prompted by the wishes or the interests of the people in the district. And this is one that is highly debated. As a representative, what is your job? Is your job to merely represent the wishes or what your people want? Or is it to use your judgment and to look after the interests of the people in your district? There's not a right or a wrong answer. I am in the minority. About 80% of Americans support the delegate notion of representation. I'm in the minority. About 20% of people support the trustee notion of representation. And let me review them with you. I introduced this the very first week of the semester, so you should remember that. Remember the delegate notion. These congresspersons are voting the wishes of the people in their district. It is a more democratic notion. Abraham Lincoln was an advocate of this. John Locke was an advocate of this. And your textbook points out that House members are more likely to be delegates than senators. While that is true, I think your book leaves out something important. In a whole bunch of research studies, the research suggests that newcomers to both the House and the Senate, especially in their first term or two, are much more likely to be delegates. And the longer that a congressperson serves in either the House or the Senate, the more likely they are to become a trustee. And remember, the trustee notion is the notion that these congresspersons are voting the interests of the people in their district as they see fit. So you're investing a lot more power in the representative. It's a less democratic notion. And I would just point out that over time, congresspersons tend to increasingly become more of a trustee over time. This was the notion of Edmund Burke. And your book does point out that senators are much more likely to be trustees than House members. What your book doesn't mention is that whether you are a delegate or whether you are a trustee as a representative, what is motivating your vote are the people you represent, your constituents. So whether you believe that you should vote their wishes or their interests, the primary thing motivating your vote are the constituents that you represent. The second element of voting that your book lays out is a party vote. And when I ask you on the exam about a party vote is exactly what its name implies. This is where a majority of one party is pitted against a majority of another party. In some countries, party voting is the lifeblood of the electoral process. For example, in my opinion, party voting in Britain is very, very healthy because the British electoral system is geared to allowing the majority party to implement their party platform smoothly. Since World War II, for example, prime ministers have gotten 96.6% of their legislative proposals passed. So the majority party governs, and the opposition cannot engage in delay tactics like in America with procedural delays, filibusters, and other delay tactics that prevent things from happening. In the British system, the majority party governs, and the minority party opposes and demonstrates to the electorate that they are a reasonable alternative. So in parliamentary systems like Britain, party voting is very, very healthy. But keep in mind that our political system was written without political parties in mind. George Washington referred to political parties as baneful, believed that they were bad things. And your book points out, and put multiple stars here, that there has been a significant rise in party voting in recent years. Your book points out that partisanship has been rising steadily since the early 1970s, that in 1970, members voted with their political party about 60% of the time. Today, it is well over 90%. And so your book is absolutely correct. Congress has become much more partisan. Congress has become much more polarized. In the old days, there were moderate Democrats, there were moderate Republicans. Yes, you had extreme liberals and extreme conservatives, but the work got done by the moderates in both parties. They are the ones that establish compromises and deal making. And because both parties have become more polarized, and because both parties have become much more partisan, deal making has become a lost art. It's kind of my way or the highway. Both political parties are afraid that if they cut a deal, they are going to be seen as kind of sleeping with the enemy. If Republicans do this, then even more conservative challengers will try to primary them, will try to beat them in the primary. If Democrats engage in this, more liberal challengers will try to oust them. And so the incentive to engage in actual governing and deliberating and compromises, and keep in mind, it is bargaining, it is compromises, it is deal making that is at the center of our whole constitutional design. The reason we got a constitution was because the large states and the small states compromised, because the free traders and the protectionists compromised, because people who wanted a president for life and people who wanted a president for 1 year, they bargained and compromised. So the real danger of partisanship being on the rise over the last half a century is that it has taken the deal makers out of the process, and the result has been far less legislation being passed. And especially given the rise in divided government, where the Democrats, for example, today are the majority party in the House, and the Republicans are the majority party in the Senate, it is very hard for that deal making to take place when you have divided government. Remember, a bill has to be passed in identical form in both chambers. And if one political party controls one chamber and one political party controls the other, and they are highly polarized and highly partisan, meaningful legislation is going to be very, very difficult to pass. So in America, the rise of party voting, in my mind, has been very destructive, and it has really undermined governing. In other countries like Britain, it has facilitated governing. I would just add one that your book doesn't mention in the minute and a half or so that I have left in this lecture, and that is presidential votes. That for a lot of congresspersons, they want to support their president. And you see this, for example, when Donald Trump was first elected president, the Republicans really rallied around him. In fact, critics of the Republicans say that the Republicans gave up their principles to support this president, and they're going to support him no matter what he wants. Whether that's true or not, I'll let you decide for yourself. But there's no question that one of the things that is likely to be a pressure to vote is if we have a Republican president right now, so I'll use the Republicans as an example. There is a lot of pressure on Republicans to back their president, because if they don't, Donald Trump might go out and support a challenger against you. And he has threatened people who he says are not loyal. He will go out and he will campaign for opponents. And so a presidential vote is, in my mind, an oversight in your textbook. And certainly I do believe that constituency voting, party voting, and presidential voting are the three major pressures on you. There are others. For example, if there is a very powerful special interest group that supplies jobs in your district, they may put a lot of pressure on you to vote.